Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is a continuation of our deep dive into Federalist 51 with Dr. Alan Gibson. Enjoy.
One additional point about Federalist number 51 is important, and that is that Madison reintroduces the idea of the extended republic famously into the argument in Federalist number 51. Why does he do that? He does that because he has introduced the proposition that you not only need to control the power of the government, that's what separation of powers does. You not only need to control the oppression that might be done by rulers. Again, that's what separation of powers does. You need to control the oppression that might be affected by one segment of the society against another segment of the society. So, namely, how the majority might oppress the minority. So, after explaining how separation of powers is going to prevent the oppression of rulers, he then goes on to the proposition of how extent of territory is going to prevent the oppression of the majority against the minority. It's interesting to me that Madison, although you can find it sprinkled throughout the Federalist Papers, he really doesn't address directly the question of why we have separation of powers in this. He doesn't defend that straight out. There are three primary reasons we have separation of powers, and you can find this. You have to take Federalist number 37 particularly into account here, and you have to take the Federalist Papers in totality to get the answers to this. But the most obvious one, and the thing that people most frequently think about, is that separation of powers prevents tyranny. The idea of a concentration of powers in a single branch, Madison says, paraphrasing Montesquieu, is the very definition of tyranny. And so if you have that concentration, then you're naturally going to have a tyrannical form of government. The other belief is that separation of powers promotes adherence to the rule of law. And this is based upon a normative axiom that no person is allowed to be a judge in their own cause. This is the idea of impartiality. And the way that this operates is that no person and no branch is also allowed to be a judge in its own cause. So the branch, Congress, legislative branch, that makes laws should also not judge the laws or execute the laws. Similarly, the executive branch executes the laws. It should not make those laws or judge those laws. And finally, the judiciary judges those laws. It should not make or execute them. So separation of powers ensures that no single branch does all of these functions at once, that they must be passed off from one to another branch in order to be executed. It therefore promotes the rule of law over the rule of the men in those separate branches. Men for their era, men and women for our era. Okay? And then finally, and this sort of reiterates something I began with at the very beginning, and that is that separation of powers promotes good government. And this is, again, I think you would be well served if you really want to understand this topic, do really well on the AP exam, to read parts of Federalist number 37 in conjunction with Federalist number 51. In Federalist number 37, Madison talks about how government involves the execution of three kinds of attributes, or what he calls valuable ingredients. A good government has to have energy, stability, and fidelity to Republican liberty, or adherence to the Republican form is another way if he says this. So you need energy in good government, you need stability in good government, and you need the Republican form to be held. Each of the branches gives some part of that attribute is primarily responsible for some part of each of those separate attributes. So what supplies energy to the government? Primarily the president, the executive does. The president supplies energy to the government because energy is necessary to execute and energy is necessary for purposes of security. President is one person and can act with dispatch, can act with speed, and supply energy to the system. Stability is provided, Madison says, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily by the Senate. The Senate has longer terms of office. It's supposed to have more national figures. They're supposed to be elected. Again, they're less frequently elected, and they can check the impulsive and passionate, in Madison's view, House of Representatives, which is more likely to make kinds of decisions that bring the reputation of the United States into question around the world. So the House of Representatives might pass some impetuous, passionate law. In his day, he's talking about something like paper money legislation, which he thinks is inflationary and contrary to economic prosperity. And he believes that the Senate can serve as a bulwark against that kind of passion being executed by any of the branches. But the House of Representatives supplies the most popular branch of government, the one most directly connected to the people. So it is the one most responsible for the final of those three aspects of governmental capability or capacity, and that is Republican liberty. So the House of Representatives, with these 2-year terms of office and numerous representatives, you get the attachment of the people directly to their government. You get the direct exercise of consent in the election of representatives, and you get Republican liberty infused into the political system. So if you put all that together, you have these separate branches exercising separate functions and imparting or infusing peculiar characteristics into the political system. You wouldn't get that if you only had one branch of government. You'd have to combine all those qualities of good government in one individual or a person or group of people, and that's historically not happening. So he believes that the three branches of government together can give you good government in that way. So there you go. There's Federalist number 51, actually a broader discussion of separation of powers, but also hopefully the argument from Federalist number 51 is clear as well.
Yes. And I appreciate that you brought in other Federalist papers too, because they help build the argument. And I mean, that is, I think, a really important thing, especially as we look at the Federalist papers, is, we sometimes talk about them again, especially in AP Gov. We have to look at Fed 10 and 51 and 70 and 78. And yes, those are important, but it's also important as a whole to building this argument to get the Constitution ratified.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for this deep dive into Federalist 51. Again, if you are listening, especially if you're an AP Gov student, I really suggest having 37 and then 47 through 51 to see how this builds as somebody who's read this a bunch, I still learned so much by listening and by reading. So, Dr. Gibson, you are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed this. Okay.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.